Material and non-material living standards. Economics, Unit 3, Area Study 2. By the end of this video, you should become familiar with various material and non-material measures of living standards within a country, how to differentiate between these measures, and how to apply these to economic events. Now, why are living standards important? And how do we measure the wealth, production, and prosperity of a nation? There are many ways countries could compare the living standards of their people. For example, what factors do you think that North Korea would consider as good metrics to determine the living standards of their people? In the opinion of their government, they would insist that keeping a strong military and a nuclear stockpile is essential to the well-being of the nation. However, I'm guessing their people might feel differently if not enough food was produced to adequately feed them. Similarly, I'm sure many wouldn't be happy if the Australian government implemented policies which introduced a 16-hour working day in order to boost the production of goods and services. We wouldn't have a bar of it. We will be covering definitions of living standards, difference between material and non-material living standards, what is used to measure living standards, how useful these measures are, and exam questions. Exam questions generally relate to how economic events influence Australian living standards. Examples of past questions include how events such as decreases in housing prices, taxation reform policy, an unfavourable movement in terms of trade, and the impact of trade liberalisation have affected living standards. These issues are generally based on policies or economic events that occurred during the year, so we could expect policy introduced in 2020, such as the JobKeeper package, to appear on the exam this year. Definitions. Living standards refer to the quality of life, comfort, and wealth experienced by an individual or group. In economic terms, these are used as a way to compare different groups of people or countries. Material living standards refer to our access to physical goods and services, or in other words, quantifiable objects. In most cases, more of something is better, right? The more access a person has to goods such as houses, cars, equipment, and food and water, and to services, such as medical care, plumbing, and counselling, you would assume that they would be able to increase the quality of life. This may not hold true for all items, such as items with negative externalities, but it holds as a general rule. Non-material living standards refer to considerations that cannot be accurately measured in dollar terms. This can include amounts of time people have available to participate in leisure activities and spend with their families, the quality of air available to breathe, and the water available to drink, and how safe people feel in their communities. These intangible factors are not as easily measured and may carry varying levels of importance to different people. However, these are still factors that should be considered when viewing the overall living standards of a population. Gross domestic product, GDP, is the monetary value of all finished goods and services made within a country during a specific period. This can be calculated through either expenditure, production, or incomes. As a way of comparing the living standards of countries, this raw measure is not so useful as larger countries naturally have larger GDPs. A better way of comparing countries is by considering GDP per capita, which is the GDP in a period divided by the amount of people in the population. This is a measure that only factors in the material living standards through the amount of goods and services in dollar terms that the economy produces, and is simple to calculate. However, does not factor in non-monetary transactions and productivity, such as household tasks. OECD Better Life Index is based on the 11 categories, including housing, income, jobs, community, education, environment, civic engagement, health, life satisfaction, safety, and work-life balance. This measure is far better at taking into consideration non-material factors, as factors such as education, Health, safety, and work-life balance are not factored into GDP or GNI calculations. The OECD Better Life Index website provides a useful summary of how the difference between material and non-material standards, as it allows you to apply different levels of weighting to each measure. If material living standards are applied more weighting, countries such as Luxembourg and the USA appear higher on the charts, whereas living standards for countries such as Norway, Denmark, and Australia is far higher if more weighting is put on non-material living standards. For a worked example, we will focus on the impact of the JobKeeper package. In this, you should identify the type of policy, briefly outline the policy, how this policy impacts material living standards, and how it impacts non-material living standards. To start with, you should identify whether the policy is budgetary, that is implemented by a federal government, monetary, as implemented by the RBA, or microeconomic policy that is targeted to one specific industry, company, or market. In this case, this is an example of budgetary policy. The next step is to outline what is involved in the policy. In the case of the JobKeeper package, this involves fortnightly payments of $1,500 per eligible employee to businesses which have faced a reduction of turnover, which is 30% of turnover for businesses with an aggregate turnover of 1 billion or less, 50% of turnover for those above 1 billion, and 15% for AC&C registered charities, who then have to pay at least this amount to their employees. We then have to assess how this policy affects material living standards. The fortnightly payments boost the income of those that would otherwise have been likely left without an income due to COVID-19, increasing their ability to access goods and services. It also has a supply-side impact by helping businesses with decreased turnover stay open during lockdown, which means more goods and services will be produced both during and after the duration of lockdown. In regards to non-material living standards, the policy can be considered to boost life satisfaction, as for some individuals, this may alleviate concerns about not being able to afford necessities during the period of lockdown. Final tip, make sure to read the question carefully. Past questions relating to living standards have seen examiners also asking students to assess the impact of another economic event on other factors such as international competitiveness. Historically, students have only responded to one of these factors when the question asked for both, which would be an unnecessary loss of marks.